Birgit had asked me to give an introduction to EOSC, so I'll speak a bit about, why we're engaging in open science, how EOSC has developed and the current governance structures, and also what's happening in terms of the implementation, because the kind of governance and implementation are two kind of separate entities or bodies doing that. So first off, why is it important we engage in open science, and why is the European Commission and other funders really driving this agenda through their policies and the different projects that they fund? I think one of the first things is that science has always been open. Even in the past, it wasn't acceptable to publish publications without being able to show the underlying evidence. And that's the same nowadays, even though it might be harder to show all of that data and all of the results because of the scale of what's been generated. But it's still important to be able to evidence those results. So really, open science is just science done right. We should be sharing more than just the publication. And when we think about open science, it's not just about that publication. I think a lot of people think about open access, but really it's about making all of the outputs of research available. So the data, any open source code that's been developed to actually do the processing. And we should also be open in other ways. When we're generating learning materials in the teaching domain, there is a movement around open educational resources. And we should also be open in the way we conduct research. So being open about the methodologies that have been used, because those are also very useful outputs that others want to reuse. I really like this definition of open science it comes from the Research Information Network, which is sadly no longer with us. But it talks about open science being science that's carried out and communicated in a manner that allows others to contribute and collaborate. So it's not just about publishing things at the end of the research process. It's about trying to conduct that research in an open way so that others can engage with it. And I think that's when we all really get the most out of the science and the research that's being done. The other thing I wanted to explain is the concept of open data and fair, because when we come to speak about EOSC and the European Commission, both of these aspects are really central to their policies. And I think people often conflate the two things, but open and fair don't mean the same. So the FAIR principles are ensuring that data can be found and understood and reused. So it's making sure the data are properly documented, they have persistent identifiers so you can actually find and disambiguate one data set from another. And within the FAIR principles, data can still be shared under restrictions. So it could be closed to certain communities, it could be under embargo for a set period, or it could be restricted access in some way. Whereas open data is really driving the agenda of making things available as broadly as possible. So they don't mean exactly the same, but there are a lot of overlaps in what each of these concepts mean. So even within open data, when you look at the 5 stars of open data from Tim Berners-Lee, it's talking about making the data available in a useful way. And as I mentioned, both fair and open are central to the kind of European Commission's policies and EOSC. We've seen different member states picking up on both of these aspects in their own national policies, and that both within the EC and also within national areas like the NFDI in Germany, there's been a lot of infrastructure that's been invested in to support the data sharing. So ultimately, what we're doing is trying to build this sciencing ecosystem so that researchers can share their data, and this gives us a better return on investment in all of the research that's done. So after that kind of brief intro to why open science is important, I want to introduce EOSC. And I don't know how aware you all are of EOSC, so apologies if any of this is kind of going kind of into the basics. Within the SRIA, which is the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda that we have within EOSC, there's a vision of what we're trying to do. And the one aspect that I'd like to highlight from this vision is developing this web of fair data and services. So this is really this notion of having a platform, a federation of all of the different infrastructure and services that's available in all of the different member states, and connecting that up so we have data that's much more accessible and services that researchers can use regardless of where they come from. So this notion of the EOSC platform, it has what we call the core, which is a set of cross-cutting underlying services. So things like your AAI, the authentication mechanisms, so that there's a single sign-on and researchers can access various different services from different areas through one login. And then we're trying to federate the data. So there are lots of domain-specific repositories, lots of national repositories, and within EOSC, we want to make that available. Now, that doesn't mean having one monolithic service that all data's deposited in. It means connecting up those different repositories so that the content is accessible in a much broader way. And then there's also this notion of the EOSC exchange, and that's this kind of environment of all of the services that, you know, there might be multiple different options researchers have for where they store their data or the tools they use to process their data. And the exchange is meant to be an environment that people can access whichever services are most relevant to their research area or to, you know, the kind of context in which they're working. So what we're trying to do within EOSC is federate the different e-infrastructures and research infrastructures and create this environment in which the data and services are brought together. So it's much easier for researchers to access relevant content and do their work. So just to kind of explain that in one visual, at the moment, there's probably multiple different repositories that any individual researcher might use. They might, you know, look at somewhere like GenBank to get their gene sequences. They might look at another repository to get kind of social science data that's also relevant for their analysis. But at the moment, they're quite disconnected. They need to go to each service. And what we're trying to do through EOSC is pull things together so that through one platform or environment, they can access content from many different places. And as I mentioned, the FAIR principles are quite central to EOSC. Essentially, FAIR is a way of describing, documenting, and identifying data. And this is kind of like the glue layer that connects all these different data and services. And within EOSC, we have what we call the EOSC interoperability framework, which defines a set of common standards that different disciplines and domains can map to so that their content is accessible. And within FAIR, the key things that are pulled out are this use of community standards. It's important that data are described in a way that others can understand. And by adopting those standards, we can then make data understandable within different domains. And another context I just want to highlight, EOSC is kind of one area of investment the European Commission's made, but it also fits into this broader data space initiative that they have. So the EC's been funding different disciplinary data spaces. There are 9 in total. So one's around the health data space, for example, or energy, or the agricultural data space. And EOSC is seen as a kind of horizontal cross-cutting initiative because it addresses all the different disciplines. So within the next period of EOSC work, the 2023 to 2025 period of work, we want to start aligning with these different data spaces, but they're still in the very early stages of development as well. And in terms of EOSC, I talk about developing this platform or environment. There are many, many projects and initiatives that are contributing to this. So the European Commission has a whole program of work where they fund different projects that might be regional in nature. So EOSC Nordic is a collaboration across all the different Nordic countries. They also have kind of thematic projects like SHOCK or EOSC Life that are working in a particular research domain. And then they have big infrastructure investments like EOSC Future. That's a big kind of 40 million investment to try and pull together the work of all of these different initiatives. So EOSC can be quite a complicated landscape to understand because there's so many different projects and initiatives that are really feeding into it. And I just want to highlight EOSC Future because that's the major investment the EC's made. EOSC Future is working on this kind of basic infrastructure. So the EOSC core and the EOSC exchange that I highlighted before. And there's the five cluster projects. So Escape and SHOCK PANOSC, EMVRI and EOSC Life are also partners in EOSC Future. And the intention is to work with the clusters to federate all of the different data and services from the clusters. There's also a direct involvement of users in EOSC Future. We have a user group which represents researchers from all across Europe and different research domains. And that's to make sure that what's developed is actually suitable for different research communities and for their needs. And there's one other project that I want to emphasize before I go and speak about the governance. This is a forthcoming project. It just starts in June, and it's called the EOSC Focus Project. And it's a coordinating and support action that's run by the EOSC Association, which is the legal entity that was set up to govern and help steer the development of EOSC. Within the EOSC Focus Project, we'll be operating the stakeholder forum. That's a bit of a confusing term. It's not a single thing or body, but it's a set of engagement activities we run, like the annual symposium event or different consultations, so that we can draw in the needs of the community. And we'll also be running a series of coordination events to bring together the different projects, make sure that the work they're doing actually aligns. We're not having conflicting approaches to similar elements of the infrastructure. And we also do various consultations through this project on things like the SRIA, which is the Research and Innovation Agenda. There will also be National Country Day workshops that we're running in collaboration with the EOSC Association members. So if you're interested in looking at what's happening in your own country and organizing some national events to help engage people in EOSC, then certainly look at the project and approach the association, because that's something we can support. Okay, so that's a bit of background context to kind of what EOSC is. The next element I wanted to talk about is the governance of EOSC, because this is something that's also developed over time. EOSC has actually been invested in. It's been an idea from the European Commission for a long time, so since 2015. And there's been a lot of groundwork really to set the agenda and then to start making these investments in projects. So there are a lot of kind of council conclusions and expert group reports that really help the EC define what they should be doing to develop EOSC. I think some of the expert groups that might be interesting for you to look at are things like the EOSC expert group. There were 2 rounds of that, and there was also a fair data expert group. And these have really given the EC some guidance on what are the key gaps that need to be developed in terms of the infrastructure. And that's then how they've defined their work programs and started to invest in the projects to develop EOSC. But this is a long-term initiative. It's been going on for several years, which is the main thing I want to flag. And within that, there's also been a governance structure that's set up. This is really to implement that vision that the EC and the member states have together. And they decided to bring together a co-programmed partnership. There's different kind of legal structures you can put together, and the EOSC Association is a EPA, a European Partnership Association. And this is the Memorandum of Understanding that was pulled together to essentially set the objectives of the EOSC Association and the EC for developing EOSC. And this led to a new governance structure. So between 2018 and 2020, there was an expert group that the European Commission set up really to start that development of EOSC governance. And there were a series of working groups run by that expert group. And there was also a governance board which represented all of the different member states. And then when we got to this stage of setting up a legal entity, which is the EOSC Association, which you'll see on the right here, this then we kind of rebuilt the governance structure a bit. We have the EOSC Association. We also have a partnership board which brings together the EC and the member states and the association. And then what you'll see now is we have this kind of 3-party collaboration between the association, the steering board, which represents all of the member states, and the European Commission. And the association is really there to try and represent the stakeholder community at large. So the EOSC Association is a membership organization. We've got, might be on my next slide, yes, 234 organizations that are members. And these come from all different sectors. So they're mostly research performing organizations, so universities. We also have a number of service providers, so different repositories or publishers or different service providers, and then some representative bodies. So the likes of the European Universities Association or Science Europe. And in terms of what we're doing within the governance of EOSC, I mentioned the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, and this diagram comes from that. We've been developing the governance, so setting up the legal entity and embedding that. And then within the projects like EOSC Future and the previous EOSC Hub project, they've been developing the core and the kind of federation of research infrastructures. And we're now kind of moving into the stage of kind of growing and embedding that. And within the next phase of work, we're also looking to widen the EOSC work to the public and private sectors. So looking to work with, you know, kind of government data, so census data, and also with the private sector more. But that's for the kind of 2025 to 2027 phase. So there's multiple iterations in the development of EOSC. The last thing I wanted to go into is really the current state of the EOSC platform and what it is that you can access and use. So the main thing that's been developed by the project so far is the EOSC portal. And this currently is the main way to navigate EOSC, to access the different data and services. It includes a virtual tour for new users, and it's where you'll find the catalogue and marketplace. And within the EOSC portal, you can navigate by different areas. You can look at scientific domains to find relevant things, or you can look for a certain type of service like different processing services or different storage and sharing services. And there's also access to some free storage and compute and support services through some of the projects the EC has funded. So I've listed 5 what we call Infra-EOSC 7 projects here. And they essentially have been given money to make services available for free. Some of them are domain-specific services like C-Scale and Reliance that are working in the kind of environmental sciences, and others are more generic like DICE and EGI-ACE and Open Air Enhance. And these are all of them, across all of them they're offering access to storage or different kind of cloud services and like high performance computing. And in some like DICE, for example, you can be allocated a personal workspace so that you can collaborate, like have an environment to share your data with your different research collaborators. And they also have services for things like persistent identifiers so that you can make sure your data's properly identified and discoverable. But these are worthwhile looking out for on EOSC portal because that's a way you can access free services. In terms of finding research data, I haven't updated this slide yet, but work within EOSC Future is going on to aggregate content from different repositories. When I kind of was developing these slides, there isn't the cross search yet, but that is something that's actually been developed and will be launched very soon. So at the moment, researchers are still looking at different repositories like the COVID-19 data portal, or their different catalogs like CESDA, which aggregates content from all the social science repositories. But we do have a kind of beta version of a cross search within EOSC that makes available some data from different services already. So that will be released very soon. And this is just a mock-up of what that will look like. So you'll be able to see that. And as we go on through the work in EOSC Future, more of the different cluster catalogues will be federated into that. So you'll have access to services from lots of different places. Oh, and what I wanted to highlight there is that there is also a recommendation feature within the EOSC portal that's been developed using AI techniques so that when researchers search for a certain type of content, we can make recommendations for other data that might be relevant to them, or other training materials or publications or potential collaborators. So the idea of federating all this content is so that we can make things more useful for researchers. Those recommendations will be based on their different viewing history or their order history for services, or what other similar users have been searching and using, so that we can kind of point people to things that they might not find otherwise. So I think there's a number of benefits for researchers in getting involved in EOSC. Obviously, I think the single sign-on makes things a lot easier for them. We've got that kind of federated identity management, so it's easier to access a greater number of data and services. There are also services that are providing access to free storage and compute, which I think is very relevant and useful to researchers. And obviously, as we get this cross-search underway, they'll be able to discover data from related fields that they may not think about otherwise, or they may not have gone to those repositories. So overall, the vision behind EOSC is to make it a lot easier for researchers to collaborate and to address those key research questions. And two final slides I wanted to just flag from the EOSC Future project. The Research Data Alliance is a member in that project, and there are a number of open calls that are relevant to researchers. There's one that's open at the moment, which is about cross-disciplinary research best practices. So it's about all of those different metadata standards that have been developed in different domains, or the kind of methodologies and ways that they're working. And there's a number of grants available, up to €50,000. So if researchers in a particular domain want to do work to improve the interoperability of research in their field, then they're able to apply for a grant and to be awarded funding to help develop those standards and enable essentially cross-disciplinary sharing of data within EOSC. And the other call, we've had one ambassador call that's happened already, and we have our first set of ambassadors. But there will be a second round of domain ambassadors. So this is an individual grant for researchers. And what they can do is essentially be an ambassador in their field. So if they're wanting to promote open science practices and promote EOSC and fair data, this is a way in which they can really support other researchers in their field, either by running workshops, raising awareness of open science, trying to share good practices. And the next deadline for this will be the 12th of August. So there's still a little bit of time. So I think both of these calls might be useful either to yourselves if you're a researcher, or if you're supporting researchers, it could be a good way to highlight ways in which they can get involved in EOSC and get support for the work that they're doing. So that's all I had to say. I'll stop the share. And yeah, we can either move straight on, or if there's time, take some questions. I'll leave that up to you, Birgit.
Yes, I think we have time for questions, and I would like to invite everyone, if you would like to speak up, maybe raise your hand, put on your camera, and we are happy to let you speak. I mean, one question which I would have is, when you see researchers exchanging on reusing data on social media, the first complaint you will find is that they complain about data on request. When you publish in a journal,
you have to then email to get the data.
You have to email, and then just recently there was another study out which says you don't get an answer, you get a no. So how might you help to address such a question? I mean, I'm aware that we have a few publisher members as well in the EOS Association.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of the funders' policies ask for things to be as open as possible. So ideally, things wouldn't be available on request. Things would be deposited in a repository and would be immediately available to as broad as possible a research community. I mean, it is always feasible to keep things closed if there's good reasons for that. So like embargo periods, or if things need to be anonymized before sharing. But I think most funders are really pushing for things to be available, not just you can contact me for the data, because that does leave major problems. Like there's a time period in, then getting access to the data. And as you said, sometimes that request won't be honored. So I think hopefully with EOSC, as people see more content being available and they see the benefits of reuse, there's a huge benefit to individual researchers when their data is reused. It increases their citation count, both on the publications and hopefully we'll see more of the kind of national research excellence kind of assessment frameworks picking up on the data as well, because I think that's a much more valuable output really than a publication. Then hopefully researchers will start to change their practices because they really see the benefits and rewards from making things available.
Yeah, I'm only aware that, you know, the users might be first and then the ones might be lagging a little bit behind in terms of, so, but we have a comment by Hans or a question.
Yeah, thank you. I can't start my video because the host has stopped it, but I can ask the question.
That's okay.
This was excellent to show all these resources where you can really access free storage, compute, and I can start my video good. And support from DRIs and Reliance EGAs, but these are projects, so these are time limited. So what's your view for the future? If now a research starting storing data, for instance, with DRIs, and now the project ends its lifetime, so what's the plans for the continuation of?
Yeah, I think this is one of the major problems in EOSC that to date, things have been done through projects, which, you know, there's a huge sustainability issue there. What happens when the project funding ends? I mean, the Commission has been working in this area and funding things since 2015. So there often are continuation projects that then enable things to be carried on. But when you have that project model, there's no guarantees. They are shifting towards, I would say, more of a kind of service model. Mm-hmm. So they have a procurement call coming out for the EOSC core. And I think this is part of the Commission's way to try and enable a basic level of services to be offered per se to everybody. So one thing we're looking at within the EOSC Future project is, rather than using that kind of project funding model, can we have a basic level of storage allocation to any researcher who comes and uses EOSC? And that's something that I think has to be then written into part of like the core service contract for whoever's operating the EOSC, because unless there's like a base level that everybody can access, it's not that useful to researchers. So I think this is in the Commission's mindset and their thoughts, but they're kind of slowly shifting away from a project model to more of a service model, I would say. So hopefully there will be, you know, like continuation, but for those individual projects, they will have an end date. And then I suspect the EC will fund more work in that area when they see that there's been a return and a value on that investment. But yeah, it's at the moment, it's unclear exactly what will happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Any other questions, comments to Sarah? Sally.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for a very clear presentation. I was wondering about the publications end. So you've talked a lot about the sort of getting access to research data and the analysis through compute and everything. And I just wondered, how do you see the sort of research data lifecycle continuing into publications and the work that is being done with EOSC tools and data being easily published at the end of the life cycle?
So are you thinking there about actual publications as well, or the publishing of data? I think
both, I think, because I see them, it's
they're integrated. Yeah, no, I agree. So one criticism we had about the strategic research and innovation agenda in MAR is that it is very data focused, or, you know, it's focused on data, software, and those kind of outputs. And to be honest, I kind of feel like it needs to be, because there has already been lots of work on publications. What I would like to see is that all of the infrastructure around publications, we already have all of the work that OpenAIR's done, that is then integrated into what happens in the EOSC around the data side of things as well, because all of these outputs are linked. It should really, like in an ideal world, a researcher should be able to go to a publication, see the link to the data, access the data directly, or the code, or have like a bundle of outputs, you know. And at the moment, there's been so much investment in the open access publication side that we already have quite good infrastructure for that, for people to be able to see the compliance levels, to access the different publications, or you have nice tools like the open access button to request something that's closed. And I think we need to then bring all of that infrastructure together with what's being developed around the kind of data and code side of things. So that needs to be part of like the broader vision too. But that's why there has been such an emphasis on data and code in the EOSC work to date, because that's really the major gap. There really hasn't been much to build common infrastructure on that level, but it definitely needs to be joined up with the publications infrastructure.
Brilliant. So bring it up to the same level and then integrate it.
Yeah, exactly. I think at the moment, the kind of gap is on the data side, but it does need to be integrated with the publication side as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Okay. So thank you again, Sarah. I think we
Thank you.